A very warm welcome. You're watching CNN News 18. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. America's comeback starts right now. This is what Donald Trump had to say as he announced his 2024 U.S. presidential bid after he filed White House candidacy papers with the U.S. Election Authority. Let's listen in to what the former U.S. president had to say in his announcement address at his Lago residence in Florida.
Now we are a nation in decline. We are a failing nation. For millions of Americans, the past 2 years under Joe Biden have been a time of pain, hardship, anxiety, and despair. As we speak, inflation is the highest in over 50 years. Gas prices have reached the highest levels in history and expect them to go much higher now that the strategic national reserves, which I filled up, have been virtually drained in order to keep gasoline prices lower just prior to the election. Our country is being invaded by millions and millions of unknown people, many of whom are entering for a very bad and sinister reason. And you know what that reason is. We will be paying a big price for this invasion into our country for years to come. Hundreds of thousands of pounds of deadly drugs, including very lethal fentanyl, are flooding across the now open and totally porous southern border. The disasters in Afghanistan, perhaps the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, where we lost lives, left Americans behind, and surrendered $85 billion worth of the finest military equipment anywhere in the world. And Ukraine, which would have never happened if I were your president, are something and even the Democrats admit that. 2 years ago, we were a great nation, and soon we will be a great nation again. When given the choice, boldly, clearly, and directly, I believe the American people will overwhelmingly reject the left's platform of national ruin, and they will embrace our platform of national greatness and glory. This is not a task for a politician or a conventional candidate. This is a task for a great movement that embodies the courage, confidence, and the spirit of the American people. This is a movement. This is not for any one individual. This is a job for tens of millions of proud people. This will not be my campaign. This will be our campaign all together. Because the only force strong enough to defeat the massive corruption we are up against is you, the American people. It's true. The American people, the greatest people on earth. We love them all. And we love both sides. We're going to bring people together.
So how are experts viewing Trump's speech and what will be the highlights of his campaign this time? Let's try and get in a point of view from both ends of the spectrum. And for that, let me quickly first go across to Charmaine Yost, a conservative strategist who's also joining me live right now. A very warm welcome to you, Charmaine. Now, what were the key highlights of Donald Trump's speech in your opinion? And also, what do you make of the timing of his address?
Well, I think right off from the top that the former president looked really, as we say in America, tanned, rested, and ready. He looked good. He sounded good. He was returning to his main themes from the previous administration. He did a really good job of laying out the accomplishments of his administration and sounding those notes that really resonated with his supporters. A lot of people going into the speech were trying to convince him that the timing was really bad. Someone even likened it to giving a big speech after the crash of the Hindenburg because things went so badly for Republicans in our midterm elections. But in his typical good luck, literally an hour before he gave his speech, the Republicans did take over the majority in the House of Representatives. So at the end of the day, his timing actually ended up looking very good.
Shamin, considering the Republicans have not performed as per expectation, what will be different about Donald Trump's campaign this time around? Is it the competition that he's set to face from other Republican rivals as well?
Well, one of the other things that was particularly interesting about this speech is it was very obviously positioned to be a shot across the bow towards the whole raft of other politicians who are anxious to throw their hats in the ring. There's multiple other people who want to run for president on the Republican side of the ticket. And so part of the reason why he was so adamant that he was going to give the speech tonight, I believe, is because he wanted to get out early in order to discourage other people from running. So I think that from that perspective, that we are seeing a real kind of Trump fatigue of people who even just a few months ago were saying that if Donald Trump runs, he's got a wide open field in front of him. People are now, particularly after the losses at the midterm, looking and saying that the field is going to be more crowded. So despite the fact that tonight, while he was on script, he sounded very, very measured. He's talked about wanting to have an elegant speech. This is followed up on some typical kinds of Donald Trump things where he was attacking Ron DeSantis with a new nickname last week. He launched an attack at Governor Glenn Youngkin from Virginia in kind of the typical way that people don't like that Donald Trump tends to do. And so there is a sense of Trump fatigue out there that is making the approach to the election much more chaotic than I think Donald Trump would like it to be.
Right. Shamin, it's interesting that you mentioned Ron DeSantis, a man who's now being touted as the Republican rising star. Why is DeSantis the one Republican rival that Trump ought to fear?
Well, I think one of the most interesting and things that we saw tonight, particularly for your international viewers, is that this Donald Trump gave this speech in Mar-a-Lago, which is right there in the middle of Florida, where Governor DeSantis is the governor of Florida. So they're both residents of the state of Florida, and this makes their rivalry particularly more interesting, that there's such geographical proximity. Ron DeSantis also has an advantage over Donald Trump in that he was one of the governors who really took a different path in confronting the COVID pandemic. Florida did not shut down the economy or the schools in the same way that other states did across the country, and they came through very, very well. And so the pandemic is really kind of an albatross around President Trump's neck. That was one of the largest reasons that he lost the election. Whereas in contrast with Governor DeSantis, that's a strong point for him. So there's very definitely a comparing and contrasting of records between these two men. And so it will be very interesting to see if Governor DeSantis decides to throw his hat in the ring. There's been mixed reports, people saying that he did not want to go up against Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump coming up with a nickname for him and kind of poking at him really is maybe a counterproductive approach for Donald Trump, because it makes it a little bit easier for DeSantis to say he's going to go. And coming in out of the midterms, we've talked already tonight about how badly it went for Republicans. One big difference is that it went extremely well for Ron DeSantis. He improved his position over his last election pretty dramatically. He expanded the number of people, not just the number, but also the groups of people who were supporting him. He had a very, very good night. And one of the most interesting things on election night was the DeSantis speech, where he talked at the front end about Florida and about the race. And then right towards the end, he pivoted to giving a speech that sounded very, very national in tone. And so that decision on his part is adding fuel to the fire of people thinking that he might decide to enter the race.
Right. Now, abortion access is one crucial issue that has proven to be a powerful force in the 2022 midterm elections. What explains Donald Trump's strategic omission of a crucial issue like ban on abortion? As someone who was the president and CEO of an anti-abortion group, were you not disappointed?
Well, I think it's an interesting choice. I think that he may have heard from people who bought into the narrative that it was not a winning issue. So I hope he'll get the more accurate information about how it is effective and how you can address the issue in a way that is winning. The country, there's no doubt that Americans are polarized on this issue, but they're polarized in very specific places where you saw the issue go one way in Michigan, for example, but it went a different way in Ohio and Florida. And that's the way American politics is supposed to work. So Donald Trump has a very, very strong record on the life issue, is one of the biggest successes of his administration. And the pro-life community was among his most strong supporters. He always took very seriously the promises that he made to the pro-life community. And if he's to be successful in mounting another campaign,
Right.
he will need to solidify that support again.
Also, Charmaine, how will Trump's decision to run for presidency impact the ongoing investigations which are still smoldering from his previous stint in the White House?
Well, my understanding is that he, even being a candidate, that he is still subject to investigation. And so I would anticipate in America, one of the most fundamental values that we hold dear is that no one is above the law. And so I would expect those investigations to move forward. And I do think that they should come to a conclusion, though. I think having them just drag on is not healthy for the system or for the candidate.
All right. Many thanks to you, Charmaine Yost, for joining in on our discussion. We are also joined in by author and political commentator Spencer Critchley. Spencer, thank you so much for joining in. Now, you perhaps have a different viewpoint about Donald Trump's speech. What did you make of his announcement address?
Well, again, and this is one of the things that puts Trump in a unique category of his own, at least within the American context. Certainly, we've seen politicians play with the truth in the past, and we've seen politicians who are outright dishonest. But with Trump, we're at a whole other level where the attack on the belief in any sort of objective reality is actually key to his whole electoral strategy. So one of the traps that lays for the media or for analysts like myself is to fact check him as if that were at all relevant. But there's an endless supply of untruths waiting, and you can bat them down till the end of time. And the point, in fact, is just to distract you fact checking him. So I'm sorry to sound somewhat nihilistic about this, but in fact, the nihilism is central to Trump's approach, that he stands for nothing. He believes in nothing except his own personal power. And again, this would normally be the kind of hyperbole that you could dismiss as just, partisan statements from a Democrat who is in opposition to a Republican. Well, first of all, I would never talk about normal Republicans this way. But Trump is in a unique category. He is a classic demagogue and is entirely unprincipled, and I think is incapable of doing anything but pursuing what he perceives to be his momentary self-interest.
All right. Ron DeSantis is emerging as the Republican poster boy. Why is Donald Trump perceiving him as the most formidable Republican rival?
Well, currently the conventional wisdom is that it's Florida Governor Ron DeSantis because he's, as the saying goes, Trump with brains and self-discipline. DeSantis is a very highly educated person from elite universities, has a distinguished military record, I believe. I think is clearly intelligent and focused, and like Trump, also appears to be unprincipled. So in many ways, he could be more dangerous than Trump. But at the same time, as I'm not the first to observe, Trump has already started attacking DeSantis, and he will continue to do that. And one of his true talents is in these vicious attacks he levels at anybody he perceives to be an enemy. And it would be so much shouting into the wind if he didn't still command the loyalty of a disturbingly large number of followers, including a still fairly strong majority of Republicans in general. So I think DeSantis is probably going to be damaged between now and Election Day 2024 in ways that he has probably never been in his career so far.
It's an interesting observation that you made. Do you think that Donald Trump's omission of the ban on abortion issue was deliberate? What were the aspects that caught your attention?
You know, it's hard to know if he thinks that strategically. I think in this case, actually, let me correct myself. This speech was clearly written for him, because it was far more focused and clearly far more organized than his usual kind of improvisatory riffing. So I think it was probably a deliberate choice, but whichever unprincipled speechwriter who should know better than to do this sort of thing for a living wrote that for him, probably wanted to stay away from abortion because it was such a losing issue for Republicans this time. They misjudged so badly in thinking that cruelty towards women would be a winning strategy for them. Removing rights from people would be a winning strategy for them. So I think it probably was planned that way. I think you're probably right. And the other things he focused on, we could point out that no, he did not create a booming economy. No, he did not handle the COVID pandemic at all well. We have hundreds of thousands of Americans who died needlessly because he didn't want to admit there was a pandemic because it might harm his reelection chances. It led to an economic catastrophe aside from the catastrophe of unnecessary death. It was Joe Biden who led us into an unprecedented recovery. You can go on and on, batting down the factual inaccuracies, but essentially what he was doing was what he does. He was trying to project an image of strength, claiming that world leaders respected him and respected America when, of course, the exact opposite is true. America lost enormous amounts of respect, and we're working very hard to try to earn it back now.
All right. Spencer, what do you expect to be different about Donald Trump's presidency campaign for 2024 compared to his previous ones?
I think just that it'll continue to get worse. I'm sorry to sound like this. There were a few other political candidates I can imagine speaking about this way, but I truly believe this man is a very serious threat to democracy, national security, and really to the security of the world. And I would think exactly the same thing about a Democrat who was behaving the way he behaves. His behavior has only gotten worse since he first announced he was running for president.
All right. Do you see the ongoing investigations impacting Trump's plans for a 2024 presidential comeback?
I hope from the point of view of the Justice Department and the other authorities who are investigating him, the state of Georgia, the Manhattan District Attorney, the New York State Attorney General, the various authorities who are investigating him, I don't believe there is a legal reason why it should make any difference to their investigations. I'm not a lawyer, but that's my understanding. You cannot run for office as a strategy for dodging legal liability in this country. And I'm glad you asked that question because that too is clearly one of the primary motivations for him to run again. He's hoping to at least make it controversial to prosecute him. And he, of course, knows intimately not only about the very serious crimes he's being investigated for now, but I would expect, knows about other ones that the rest of us haven't learned about yet.
Right. Spencer, before I quickly let you go, on a day when Poland has been hit by a missile and the war in Ukraine is only escalating, will Donald Trump gain an edge going by the current geopolitical climate, something that he also milked in his speech when he criticized Biden's foreign policy?
I don't really think so, no. I mean, other world leaders need, of course, pragmatically, to pay attention to who wins elections in the United States and who appears to have popular support, whether they're in or out of office. I understand that countries have to judge their own self-interest in these things, and they have to deal with leaders whether they like them or not. I think, though, that the Republican Party is suffering very serious damage right now, and Joe Biden and the Democrats have gained a great deal of credibility simply because they just had a historically almost unprecedented success in fending off these midterm losses, even in the face of a high inflation rate and the other challenges that Joe Biden is facing, despite the fact that I would maintain in most ways he's one of the most successful presidents in his first 2 years that we've had in terms of getting things done. But yeah, I think that if the Republicans had done as well as they believed they were going to do in the midterms just now, then
All right, I think that was put very eloquently. Thank you so much, Spencer Critchley, for joining in on CNN News 18. It was a pleasure to have you with us.